I've had several people over the last few months ask that I make a video on the subject of loneliness. And the hard thing for me, I think, about making this video right now is that I'm not feeling particularly lonely. So I'm not strongly in touch with a feeling of loneliness in my own personal life, but I have been. So I think it will help for me to talk about loneliness by also going into some of those feelings from when I was lonely, much more lonely, or talking about that time of loneliness in my life, what I went through, how I ended up there, and how I got out of it also. But let me just start by saying, when I was a therapist for 10 years in New York City. A lot of the clients that I worked with were people who told me explicitly that they felt lonely. They had a lot of loneliness a lot of the time. And what I saw over time is a lot of the things they were going through in their life, the things that ended up getting them diagnosed with different psychiatric disorders, were really resulting from their loneliness. And not just their loneliness, but I think the big thing that the loneliness contributed to their problems was it made it more difficult for them to figure out how to get out of their problems. I think a lot of people have a lot of problems, but I think when people are very lonely, it makes life more hopeless. It makes things much more difficult to get a sense of hopefulness out of. Loneliness, it takes away that sense of purpose and meaning. And what do I mean by loneliness? When I think of loneliness, especially from my own history of having been a lonely person for many years of my life, loneliness was that fundamental feeling of being alone, of really feeling that I had no allies. I had nobody who really knew me really well, nobody who really cared about me very much, nobody who maybe even I felt that I loved that much and felt that connected with. I didn't feel like there was anybody out there who was really like me, and no one out there who was like me who also knew that I even existed. I felt my existence was so solitary. And loneliness really was a feeling for me fundamentally. It was just a feeling of heaviness, of emptiness, of sadness, or maybe not even emptiness, of being so full, actually, of all these feelings, but having nowhere to put them. All this sadness, all this hope, all this built up desire to do something, and yet there was nowhere for it to go, nowhere for it to come out. I tried to find different ways to express it, sometimes through art, through music, even through maybe having a pet. I remember I used to connect with our family dog because I felt sometimes he was the one who got me the best, or my cat. My cat would come and snuggle with me at night as I'd be lying in bed, and I would cry and just wish that he was a person, wish he was a friend who cared about me. And my cat did care about me, but then my cat would go off and sneak outside and catch rats and birds and things like that and forget about me, and I'd be left all alone and realizing, God, my best friend is a cat, my best friend is a dog. There's nobody out there who really knows me. And it was a feeling often that like I had a life of such meaning, but it was so private and so personal and so disconnected from anyone else that it was almost like, does it really mean anything in the greater picture? It was like, why am I doing any of this? It's not that I was exactly suicidal, but it was just a feeling of meaninglessness somehow. Like, wait a second, there's got to be some more meaning, but I'm just not feeling it. Also a feeling of despondency, like I didn't know what to do to better connect with people. I was trying everything at my disposal to connect with people, and it wasn't working. And I was just left with all this built up energy inside myself, all this sadness, all this sense of stuckness. And yet I couldn't do anything about it, and no one heard it. Nobody really saw it, or even if they did, they didn't know how to do anything about it. And it was incredibly frustrating. I did eventually, at various points, start coming out of it, sometimes just being very involved with activities with other people, even if they didn't know what my inner world was about, was very helpful because I was distracted. I was doing stuff, I was active, I was physically active, I was around other people. That helped. But then when I'd be alone, it would all come back. For me, ultimately, the cure for my loneliness, personally, was two things. And the first one was really working very hard to build a relationship with myself on the inside. That was through, I guess, primarily through journaling, through really getting to know myself and writing down my relationship with myself. Just talking about me with me, it was like, that really did help, but it certainly wasn't enough, but it was a big part of it. And I think by developing that relationship with me, it eased some of my desperation. Because when I was more desperate to connect with people, I think people sensed that desperation and they were often kind of turned off by it. They were like, ooh, this person needs too much, they want too much, and they want it too quickly. And it was like I was somehow someone who they wanted to keep a little distance from. They liked to be attracted to people who were happy and gave something and weren't so deep and so heavy a lot. So what I felt is the more that I connected with myself and was able to the degree I was able, meet my own needs on the inside, the less I was desperate for others to do it for me. Then the second part was when I did start to find people who were more in line with me, who shared more common values with me. I started making friends. And it wasn't the most perfect friends at first, but when I started finding people more and more who shared more values in common with me, I felt I was able to express more of myself, more of my inner relationship that I already had with me, and they were enhancing of that. And then I really started to have real personal and interpersonal connections with other people. And what I was able to do, the less desperate I was by doing all this inner work with myself, healing my traumas, getting to know myself better, working through a lot of my grief process in my private, intense relationship with me, the more I did that, the less needy I was and the more I was able to give to other people. And what I found is that pretty much everybody to some degree is lonely. And often people sometimes who don't seem the most lonely out in the world, they have their own private loneliness. And if they can find someone who really hears them, who mirrors them, who mirrors back to them their deeper sides, their deeper relationship with themselves that they may not share with anyone, they feel really welcoming. So what I found is the healthier I got and the more I connected with people who had more values in common with me, the more they wanted me in their life. So the more I gave them, the more they turned around and gave me back. It was like really good karma. And so what happened actually is a lot of their fundamental loneliness that they had was quelled by being in a relationship with me, a friendship primarily. And my primary loneliness was quelled by being in a relationship with them. So actually that friendship was very mutually beneficial on that level of equality for working out and healing my loneliness and theirs simultaneously. I've seen that again and again. Now, is my loneliness cured? Do I never experience it? Not at all. Because actually I travel a lot. I live abroad a lot. I go to places where I don't know anyone. And often I get lonely, especially after a few days of being alone, or sometimes something difficult happens and I have nobody to share it with, and then it can really hit me. I just feel so alone. Now, it does help that we live in a modern era where sometimes I can just get on the internet and connect with people that I care about in faraway lands, but sometimes that's not even possible. And I can have that primary loneliness again, and I have to work hard to first have my relationship with myself. I always bring a journal to write in, and that can help, but also trying to find people, anybody who's best able to be helpful to me. And so I work really hard to foster my connections with other people. And one way is by being very giving, being very caring, being very open, being generous with myself, giving a lot of myself. And what I find is, again, part of having good karma and building good karma is by being very generous. And I find often people are open or more open to giving back. And part of it, again, is using discretion. If I have 20 people that I could potentially choose from to do my investing in interpersonally, to try to choose the best ones, the most open ones, the most caring ones, the most giving ones. And that, for me, really does help quell my loneliness. But to take it a step back, what about when I was a child, and I was so lonely in my family of origin. And I didn't have the skill set that I have now, that I've developed over 25, almost 30 years of being an adult. When I was a kid who felt hopeless and devoid of the skills interpersonally of knowing how to connect with people, more a victim of trauma and someone who expressed a lot of the traumatic kind of behaviors that I had been taught by people who were my primary role models for relationships. I wasn't the best person to be a friend to others. I wasn't the most giving and caring and loving person. I was confused a lot of times. And I could push people away who I wanted to really care about me. The people who could have best quelled my loneliness were sometimes people who I demanded too much from or was angry at that they weren't spontaneously behaving like the parents that I didn't have. So I pushed them away. So what were my choices as a child? A lot of times they were really limited. A lot of times what I did is I just engaged in solitary activities, had a lot of personal creative pursuits that made me happy, did a lot of collecting fossils and creating art and playing music and different things that I liked to do. But it was a lonely life and it was a sad life. But I remember all through my childhood always thinking, this is not going to last forever. Someday, I'm going to be happy. Someday I'm going to have real friends. Actually, as a child, I thought someday I'm going to find the perfect woman I'm going to marry and I'm going to be happy forever. That has not been my destiny, but that's okay because I actually have made wonderful friends. But as a child, that was my hope. That was the way that it manifested for me in my fantasy, that I was going to have that perfect person out there who was going to be the person who I was going to connect with, who was going to meet my loneliness needs. But that's me. What about other people who I've seen? Because as a therapist, again and again, I saw people who were really profoundly lonely, and they were older than I am now. I saw people in their 50s and their 60s many people who came to therapy and told me, you know, I see you once a week, Wednesday at 2 o'clock every Wednesday afternoon, and actually I haven't had a conversation of more than 3 words with anyone since last Wednesday at 2 o'clock. You are the only person that I actually talk to. So you're the primary person, Daniel, who is helping me meet my loneliness. And I'm so lonely during the week. I spend 45 minutes with you and I think, my God, there's 168 hours in a week and this person talks to me for 45 minutes. That's not enough. So they would say, well, what can I do? And I'd say, oh, there's so many things you can do. I would even say have to do if you ever want to hopefully get out of that loneliness. I would always recommend self-therapy or going to activity groups or trying to find people to make friends with. But a lot of times people didn't have certain motivations, or they just felt it didn't work for them, or they just felt they constantly were rejected. Sometimes for certain people, being in a relationship with a therapist who they paid or who their insurance paid was the best they can find. It was like sort of cliche, but sometimes people could say, well, it was like a built-in friend, someone who isn't going to reject you because they're being paid to be in this relationship. What they're getting out of the relationship is not what you are emotionally giving them. It's from the money that they're getting and their desire to be useful, their altruistic sense inside of them. But it's not like an equality friendship-based relationship. I would also say for me personally as a therapist, it was like I had empathy for people who were suffering in ways that I felt my life easily could have turned out to be like. And so I wanted to help people take the reins of control back in their life. But it's very difficult, especially when people who have gone on for decades and decades and never figured out how to take the reins of their life, or I say to go back and learn how to take control of the reins of their life when they maybe never had it in the first place. It's like learning how to build a skill set that was not something they were given through modeling as a child. So I think, again, something that people really have to do if they're lonely is they have to start by figuring out how to meet some of their own needs. I guess the word I would use is take control of some sort of self-therapeutic process, some self-directed process where they have their own primary agency in learning how to change their life. And realizing, because what I've seen again and again is outside people often can't do it. best therapist in the world can't save someone if the person's not putting in a huge amount of effort themselves. It can help to have outside people. It can help to have a whole surrounding community that's loving and caring. But people, especially if they don't have that community around them, or maybe if they have only a very small version of that community, they have to take responsibility for it themselves. And a big part of what I've seen also is that if people do have a very small number of people in their life who are giving, but they have huge loneliness needs, huge unmet emotional needs, unresolved needs from going all the way back in their life, often what happens is people who are very desperate for connection, people who are very harmed and hurt and full of pain and loneliness in the way like that I once was, can really demand too much from any one or two individuals in their life. They can be too needy. And basically people can tap out their friends. I saw that again and again in therapy, that many people didn't come to therapy until their last couple of friends finally threw up their hands and said, I can't be friends with you in a super intimate way anymore. You need too much from me. You're demanding too much. I'm exhausted. I can't help you anymore. I've tried for a long, long time, and I just got to take a break. I got to take a step back. And that time is when many people said, oh my God, I need to talk to somebody professionally, because in my personal life, just in the free way that people give and take in friendship, I don't really have anybody anymore. And so how do people start rebuilding the community? I think some of it entails really taking a good hard look at ourselves, figuring out what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses. How do we begin to give? And I think a lot of people, from what I've seen, and I remember this from my own personal life, is feeling sort of an anger, a resentment, like, wait a second, I didn't get enough in my life. I wasn't given enough in my life. I've had a really unfair shake of the dice in so many ways, and now you're telling me that I actually have to be more giving? That's not fair. Why should I be more giving? I haven't been given enough. And in a way, as a child, it was true. I wasn't given enough, and I didn't have the resources to know how to give. But as an adult, what was my option? It's like people weren't going to just spontaneously give me anymore. They didn't owe me anything. When I became an adult, the world actually didn't owe me anything anymore. Adults didn't owe me anything anymore. I didn't have parents anymore who were responsible for me. So really, the only person who could really give me when there was nobody else to give me was me. I had to become the parent of myself. And I think that fundamentally is true for everybody. That fundamentally, once we become adults, the primary person in our life who is responsible for taking care of us, who is responsible for being our parent, is us. We have to take the reins of our life and figure out how to fundamentally solve our problems. And anybody else who's going to try to help us, friend or therapist, is just ultimately a secondary figure. And I think a lot of people, especially I've seen people who are really lonely, get into that desperate place where they feel like they themselves on the inside can't do it, and they want someone else to give them the answer. They want someone else to take those primary steps to love them and care about them and respect them and be there for them in the way that they can't. Friends, most friends will not engage in that. Or if friends do try to do that, sometimes it's like they're the type of people who end up giving too much, and they can even be kind of self-harming in how much they give to other people. They want to give more than they're able, and they can tap themselves out, and they can let themselves run dry emotionally. I think therapists can even do that, but it is the job of a therapist, I think, sometimes to jumpstart that process in people who haven't figured out how to give it to themselves. But ultimately, people have to figure out how to take responsibility for themselves. And they can use the modeling they learn in a relationship with a therapist or even as a friend to figure out how do I expand on this. And also, everybody, from what I've seen, has something to give to someone else. Everybody has gifts. Everybody has the ability to love somehow. And if we look inside ourselves and say, where is our ability to give? It may not be that big, but there's always someone we can give to who needs something. There's so many needy people out in the world. And I don't mean giving money. I think sometimes people give money in ways that they want things back, but I think that doesn't really fundamentally work in healing that problem of loneliness. I think it means giving of our attention, giving of our ability to listen, and learning how to develop that skill. And again, it comes back to learning how to give that to ourselves, to learn how to develop that loving, giving relationship with ourselves, and then expanding it, transferring it into our relationships with others. And what I've seen is when people can do that, their loneliness can go down, and they can get better at it and better at it. And the other thing is, like this karmic relationship of what we give, we receive, the more people learn really how to give of themselves, primarily give to themselves in their relationship with themselves, and then transfer it to others, the more the world starts giving back to them. I can't explain exactly why that is. And sometimes actually I can explain it though. I think giving people who give more, who are more giving to themselves, who are more self-loving, and by extension loving of others, have a certain radiance, give off a certain energy. Their faces are different, their expressions are different, their eyes look different. And I think people subliminally, other people, pick that up. Yes, there are people out there who will take advantage of people who give, but I also think there are people out there who are healthy people who are drawn to it, who are drawn to people who are just more giving souls. And they give to those people more, and then they get more in return. And as the result, both of them have their loneliness go down. So, what's the magic bullet? What's the magic answer? Fundamentally, I think the magic bullet, the magic answer is hope. That there is always hope for change. People can change profoundly. I have seen people change profoundly. I've seen people who are very lonely become people who are not very lonely. And I've seen people who are very lonely become people who are not very lonely, who are actually able, because of their insight, their history, their knowledge, their empathy of loneliness, able to help other people break out of that cycle and help other people learn to help themselves, who in turn help other people. And I think as a primary case example, I'm one of those people. I think in many ways I was someone who was set up. If I hadn't learned how to fight for myself and figure a lot of this stuff out through all the resources at my disposal, I was someone who very easily could have been someone who was a profoundly lonely person. And I really just don't see myself someone who's like that anymore.